Welcome viewers to another exciting edition of the AAU Talks. This is AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. My name is Felicia Kwagbaji and I'm your host for this session. Today we'll be talking about the very important issue of implementing e-learning in African universities. How exactly do we go about this? What do we need to know as vice chancellors, as staff, as students, and as stakeholders of the university? We are told of how critical it is to tap into emerging technology, emerging ICT infrastructure and tools to be able to improve our teaching, our learning, and our research. What can we do? What tips do we need to know? With me in the studio to discuss this very important issue is Ms. Nodumo Dlamini. She's the Director of the ICT, Communications and Knowledge Management at the Association of African Universities. Ms. Dlamini has 25 years of experience working in the field of ICT, 10 of which she spent at Africa University implementing technology, e-learning solutions in that university. Welcome to the show, Ms. Dlamini.
Thank you very much, Felicia.
We are very happy to have you here.
I'm also happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Just to move into the discussion, we want to have an idea of what exactly e-learning is and how different it is from the face-to-face approach that we know of.
Thank you, Felicia. E-learning is the use of technology to deliver lessons or to deliver the content. There are different types of e-learning. Some types of e-learning are fully online.
Okay.
Students don't see the professor at all, but they go to a website and they access their learning content. Another type, the professor appears in front of the students at some scheduled time, but also uses e-learning in a blended approach. It's different because we are using technology for delivering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that what they call blended learning?
Yes, that is what they call blended learning, where the professor partly is available face-to-face and sometimes he or she is not, and then uses the technology to deliver.
So which of these two approaches is better or is preferable?
I think e-learning is here to stay because the young people love gadgets and the technology is now prevalent. So we need to use technology. For example, in Africa, many people have access to mobile phones. How can we use those mobile phones for delivering learning?
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you are saying is that e-learning and blended learning are both okay, or e-learning is preferable. I'm not sure that came out quite well. In terms of my earlier question as to which of these two approaches works better.
I think it depends on the institution. There are some institutions which are set up to deliver online learning because their target students are diverse. They want to reach as many learners as possible. There are some universities which are set up to accept face-to-face students. So then they can blend the approach and use both face-to-face and online learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to know, how exactly important is e-learning? Why should I abandon my face-to-face, or why should I add on e-learning to what is happening at the moment?
E-learning is important particularly because African universities have huge classes. I remember one time at Makerere University, professors had up to 300 students in a class.
Sometimes even more.
Yeah, sometimes even more.
Yes.
But can you imagine if the content that the professor is delivering is available online? So that those students who are unable to get that special attention from the professor or who missed the class can actually follow what was going on in the class. It's also useful in terms of assessment. You can do better assessment using e-learning. You can do quizzes, so you can test whether your learners are actually learning, are they following what is being taught. So and also the flexibility for the mature student, for the women who have children to take care of home. They can learn at their own time because the content is out there.
Okay.
And you can make sure the quality is similar in terms of the content, because it can be peer reviewed. Then when it's put there, we know that everyone is getting the same standard.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
But I'm curious, Ms. Nodumo, you see, in the face-to-face approach, once the lecturer is standing in front of the students, they can just tell something. They can tell from the person's facial expressions and mannerism, and they can tell the person didn't understand something that is being explained.
Yeah.
So I'm concerned with the e-learning approach. Doesn't that face-to-face interaction and that interpersonal relationship, is it not missing in this approach?
Yeah, I think there are some aspects. We can never demean the role of a professor or the role or the importance of a face-to-face experience.
Yes.
But we can use technology to make up for it. For example, if we schedule times when the professor appears on a video and is there to speak to the students, and the students can send comments live. It might not be exactly the same, but we can improvise through the use of technology. Yeah.
So from all your submissions so far, I think you've sort of highlighted the issue that e-learning is very important and we can't do away with it. So let's say I'm a vice chancellor and I've heard all of these things, of course, from several other forums and platforms, and I've come to the conclusion that yes, this is the next move, this is what will be good for my institution, and I want to start implementing e-learning. How do I start? How do I go about it, and where exactly do I start in all of this process?
Thank you, Felicia. As a vice chancellor, you are the key implementer. You are the person who's supposed to lead in terms of the visioning process, so that all the stakeholders within the university move with you. So the first step is to create a process of discussion and visioning and ensuring that there's a committee that is appointed to champion the e-learning. So that's the very, very first step.
Which means that leadership is very key in all of this.
Very, very key. The leadership must begin a conversation about e-learning, so that everyone understands that the university wants to do this. Yeah.
You also spoke about the need for the vice chancellor and the leadership to move along with all other stakeholders.
Yeah.
Who are these stakeholders? And then we also want to know whether external stakeholders play a role in this process of e-learning.
In a university, the stakeholders are the academic faculty. So the deans of faculties, the people that actually lead the different colleges, schools of faculty, must be on board. The vice chancellor's office must be involved. The librarian, the directorate of finance, the students' body, everybody must be involved, and the ICT department must also be involved. Yes.
I also asked whether external stakeholders do play a role.
Yes, they do. It's important to involve the stakeholders because they are the ambassadors of the universities. The private sector that the university collaborates with, the communities where the university goes to do research, they must be aware that there's something new that the university is planning to implement.
So in that case, are we involving them just for awareness, or there's something special they are bringing to the table?
They are the ambassadors because the university wants to be visible. The university wants to attract as many students as possible, and also the funding. Some of them might be able to assist the university in terms of the implementation process or some resources that the university needs.
You also made mention about the critical role of setting up a committee to drive the whole process.
Yes.
Which units in the university or which individuals should be represented in that subcommittee to be set up to lead the process? And what exactly should be their role, or what exactly are we expecting them to do?
There must be a chairperson, possibly the deputy vice-chancellor responsible for academic affairs. There must be a secretary to the committee. There must be the ICT director. There must be a representative of Senate who represents the colleges or the faculties within the university. There must be a representative of the bursar or the director of finance in the university. There must be a representative from the students' body. Yeah, and the role is really to champion the implementation, to do research, to also do learning visits, to go to other institutions and learn the good practices and bring them into the process of the university. Yeah.
I'll come back shortly on the learning visits to good institutions. But just before that, I want to find out if I've been able to bring all my stakeholders along with me as the Vice-Chancellor, and all those who are supposed to be part of the team are with me now. They've all agreed. Let's move on and implement the e-learning. What exactly are some of the tips or some of the key flag areas that I should be aware of?
It's important to do an e-learning readiness review. So the committee must begin by doing an e-learning readiness review. Look at the ICT infrastructure, is it adequate? Look at the equipment, look at the skills of the staff and the students, and also ensure it understands the process that's involved and what the university needs to do to fill in any gaps that would affect the implementation process.
It looks like it will be quite a cumbersome process. Is that it?
Yeah, it is. It's actually very involving, but it can be done.
And it has been done elsewhere?
It has been done, yes.
Do we have some success stories of institutions across the continent who have implemented e-learning quite well that you may have worked with or that you are aware of?
Yes, I'm aware of Rhodes University in South Africa. They started quite a while ago. I'm aware of the University of Botswana. I'm aware of my former institution, Africa University.
Because
they started they started quite a while ago. I'm aware Makerere University is also implementing, but what I've seen over the years is that there's an uneven progress within a university. You'll find one college or faculty is far ahead of another college. And you can be in a faculty and think nothing is going on in that university in terms of e-learning. Then realize there's some fire in another
So how do we resolve that? How do we make sure that we're able to bring those who are not doing so well to the same level as those who are doing well within an institution? Or what causes that?
I think it's the visioning process. It's important that the Vice-Chancellor takes care of this at the beginning, makes sure everyone is moving at the same pace, by ensuring there's capacity building, there's awareness, there are targets, there are milestones that the deans of faculties need to meet in terms of the e-learning project. It's very easy for one component of the institution to progress and another to be left behind.
All right, viewers, for those who just joined, This is AAU Talks on AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. With me in the studio today is Ms. Nodumo Dlamini, and we are discussing the topic of implementing e-learning in African universities. Please feel free to send us your comments via our Facebook page on Association of African Universities, and then also via our Twitter handle at AAU_67, and then we'll read it. We are having a very engaging discussion, and then we'll move on to bring you more details. AAU TV, we promise you nothing but the best. So Ms. Nodumo, just before the break, you were taking us through how important it is to implement e-learning, how to start the whole process. You also spoke about the stakeholders who are involved.
Yeah.
Just to move the discussion forward, we want to know, are there some risks associated in implementing e-learning?
Yeah, there's a risk associated with anything to do with change management.
Sure.
There could be resistance from the professors, there could be resistance from the others that must release the resources so that this happens. So the risks really need to be addressed through extensive awareness campaigns and a joint visioning process, and also ensuring that the good practices from other universities are bring to bear to inform the project. Yeah,
I can imagine the risk, especially from those who are supposed to use the technology. Because if I'm used to standing in front of students over 20 years writing on boards, and then all of a sudden you are telling me to do it via online. You know, I also see the issue. Sometimes the resistance could be because they don't have the skill. Because especially the older generation, they might not really know how to, or they may have very little knowledge about that. So how do we resolve some of these issues?
From experience, we've seen that professors are very proud because, you know, they are knowledgeable people.
And they are professors.
They are professors.
Yes.
So you can't, you know, put a professor in an awkward situation. It's important that we are diplomatic when we introduce this e-learning, else they will not engage. It's important to use one of them to handhold them and show them how it's done.
Like ambassadors.
Yes, There's a fear which is natural. I think all of us have some fear related to something. So just like them, they fear. So as the implementer or the person supposed to help them, you need to understand where they are coming from. If some of them don't move with you, don't worry. Move with those that are moving, so that then those that are trained can then train those that are lagging behind. Yes.
What about the cost? Can we look a bit at the cost involved in implementing e-learning?
The cost is will be part of the implementation plan. An implementation plan will be drawn, which following the e-readiness review. The implementation.
What is that, please? The e-readiness review.
E-learning readiness review.
What would that entail?
The committee comes back from its learning visits and does an analysis of where the institution is in terms of ICT infrastructure, the skills of the staff, the equipment. Because the e-learning readiness review is sort of a position statement. To say, if we are going to do it, this is what we have, this is what we don't have. This is where there are the gaps, these are our strengths. Yes. So the e-learning implementation plan will really bring the aspect of course based on what is on the ground. For example, if a university doesn't have an e-learning server, if it's going to host it internally, it has to buy it. If a university is going to host its e-learning management system on the cloud, it needs to budget for the annual cost of hosting. If the university plans to train people annually, its staff annually, there must be a budget for that. The other budget is to do with the content, because the content has to be changed
Okay.
so that it suits the online environment.
But is it the same content as they were teaching in the face-to-face approach?
In terms of the subject matter aspect is the same, but
Okay.
it needs to be re-engineered.
Okay.
Yeah, so the university needs to understand how it will do it. Is it bringing someone to support the process? Are they doing it internally? What equipment do they need if they are going to do some videos, for example, or to animate some of the content? Are they going to go for retreats to be able to reconstruct the content?
Okay. We want to know, are there special e-platforms or e-tools or e-resources which are used in this process of e-learning?
Yes, the majority of universities in the continent are using Moodle.
Okay.
Some are using Sakai, some are using Blackboard. There are quite a number of learning management systems.
Okay.
But in Africa, Moodle, Sakai seem to be the leading learning management systems. Okay. Yes, yeah.
Which means that quite a number of institutions are already implementing e-learning at some scale.
Yes, yeah. A number of universities in Africa have attempted to implement e-learning or are in the process.
Okay.
A few of them are now mature in terms of their implementation.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I was about to ask why you are saying have attempted, which means they started and they stopped at some point, or?
I think most universities have not developed e-learning policies and e-learning strategies, and they are not following them. So it's not a policy for the professor to put his content online. But the university has a learning management system, has everything in place, but is not enforcing it.
Okay.
So then you find that some do it, some don't do it. That's why I'm saying attempted, because it's still not an institutional process.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
All right, viewers, we are still discussing the issue of e-learning implementation in higher education institutions in Africa. And so far, Ms. Nodumo has brought out key issues. She first spoke about the need and how leadership plays a very critical role. She's also mentioned the need to set up a committee who would sort of engage in learning visits, who would drive the whole process. She also made mention of some key components, directorates or officers in the institution which should form part of this committee. She's mentioned the need for an implementation plan to guide the whole process. So that is where we are. Would continue with the discussion.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Nodumo, for those institutions who are not new to the whole e-learning process, what should they be doing differently to improve what is currently happening on the ground?
Thank you, Felicia. The institutions that have some experience in implementing e-learning need to consider doing a review process so that they understand how far they are, what they've done well, what needs to improve. With most of our projects in African universities, we've noticed that we don't step back and monitor and learn and then plow back the lessons that we've learned from the process. So that is what I would advise, because it's such an important process in terms of measuring progress.
Exactly.
Yes, but we are always busy implementing, doing, but we don't create time to reflect. Yes. Yeah.
And then again, I think there's also the critical issue of even keeping records.
Yeah.
So that the new institutions which are yet to start can go somewhere and then they can have access to learn the whole story.
Yes.
Are you aware of any activity like that? Like any source you could point new institutions to go and sort of have some information to guide them in their process?
I think that's an extremely important point. So universities improvise by learning from each other, by physically visiting or inviting experts from other universities to come and actually walk them through. But the documentation of that knowledge, I think it creates an opportunity maybe for us at the association to think about policy briefs or a knowledge base somewhere where universities in the continent can go and find all these lessons. Yes.
Which leads me to my next question about what exactly the Association of African Universities is doing to help universities as they implement their e-learning, process.
What we are doing, we run e-learning seminars for the member universities. We invite them for training in the area of e-learning. We are also working with a number of partners, for example, eLearn Africa. We've signed a memorandum of understanding with them, and they are ready to support our member universities to rethink their e-learning strategies and to put out their content on platforms that are visible. We are also involved in a project with the African Union Commission. We are thinking through the Pan-African Virtual and E-University, which is part of the Pan-African University Initiative of the African Union Commission. Yes.
Has that started already, or it's in the pipeline?
It's still being, it's on the table, it's being thought through. There's a task force that is working on that project.
Is AAU part of this task force?
Yes, yes, we are. Yeah.
So I'm back to our earlier discussion of implementing e-learning in the university level. How would universities ensure that their strategy ensures inclusiveness of the various stakeholders, of people, ensuring that it's fine in terms of gender, in terms of people with disability, in terms of various stakeholders like that? How do we ensure inclusiveness in our e-learning strategy?
I think the composition of the task force or committee that I talked about earlier needs to include those diverse stakeholders, so that as the implementation strategy or the strategy for e-learning is being developed, the voices or the inputs in terms of the disability friendliness, how is the strategy, how is the implementation going to take care of blind students? So it's really at the formulation of the task force. The roles, as you mentioned, there must be a person who will ensure the strategy and the document speak to the inclusivity agenda.
All right. So I'll give you the last 1 minute or so for your final words, and then we'll wrap up the session.
Thank you, Felicia. I'll call upon the universities in Africa to review their e-learning strategies and to work with their universities to ensure e-learning moves to a mature level in terms of implementation. We as African universities can benefit quite a lot by ensuring that our content is out there on the e-learning platforms. We can recruit more students. We can access those types of learners who would not be able to come to a university and study full-time. And this is where the world is going, so we need to make sure that our universities are also up to date. Thank you, Felicia.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nodumo. It was a pleasure to host you today.
Thank you very much.
All right, viewers, so we've come to the end of our discussion. We've been discussing e-learning implementation in Africa universities. The guest on the show was Ms. Nodumo Dlamini, and she's given us quite some good tips. She stressed on the importance of leadership and how central it is for leadership to drive the whole process. So we look forward to another discussion on this issue. And this is AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. I'm Felicia Kwagbeji, and I've been your host for the show. Thank you, and do stay tuned.